Hello everyone, I'm Nuppa Langa and we are in a session with Miss Rimina Mohapatra for our MPhil class on research seminar with early researchers who are just preparing for thesis. Rimina, just to introduce Rimina, she is an author, editor and publisher manager of Routledge India, and that's how I know her actually. Her academic publications include the books Hegel's India, and reading Hegel. And she completed her postgraduate and her undergrad in philosophy from St. Stephen's College, New Delhi, and MPhil in philosophy from University of Delhi. And her MPhil dissertation is a Kantian critique of Noam Chomsky's linguistic minimalism and entitled Problem of Method in Linguistic Inquiry. How is biolinguistics possible? She was also junior specialist at the Department of Philosophy, University of California, Santa Cruz, USA, and junior research fellow, University Grants Commission of India. With an experience of 15 years in academic publishing in the humanities and social sciences, she is the key liaison for editorial desk production for Routledge India. So there are a lot of credentials. She's an expert in, copy editing, proofreading, designing books, and we go back like 10 years ago when I first started publishing with Urimina, and I think she's quite a tough editor and a very strong professional. So she also, but I like the creative sides of her. I want to introduce the theme of our discussion today, the Writercycle Diaries, Academic Writing to Publishing. So seems very interesting, Rimina. I welcome you to interact with the students at Forman Christian College University. They are all MPhil students and literature majors. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Nubba. That was very generous. I am really, truly glad to have come today. And very, very happy that you all could make it. Toughest questions for academics is which is writing, and then the increased pressures of publishing, and as aspects of what academic writing involves, and also what academic publishing does. We could call it the Writer Cycle Diaries, and the reason being it was sort of a pun on Motorcycle Diaries, which some of you would know. Before becoming the great icon, Marxist revolutionary icon Che Guevara, Ernesto Guevara, a medical student, in fact, Argentinian, and he decided that at the age of 23, he was just sick of everything and he wanted to just see the world, and so he in 1952 he just took off with his friend, jumped on an old motorcycle, and kind of embarked on this 8-month journey across South America just on the bike. Reason I thought of it was that uh, writing and publishing is a little bit like that, and why that is so. The expectation when we are thinking of being academics and academic writers and in publishing is basically this. Now that's Che Guevara on a motorcycle, wind in his hair, uh, sort of free grassland, and he's on his way to, that's the expectation of being an academic, that writing, academic writing, and you can publish, and so that's how it'll be. And what is the reality? So the reality is a bit like this. I feel like, it's basically you are sort of solitary mostly, because research, a lot of it actually comes down to the person, while how you do it, when you do it. And then you are sitting with a motorcycle which may or not work at times, and he here also has a book in his hand, which most of us will have if you're an academic, in academic writing. And so you next tend to think, what is, if this is the reality, how are we going to get to that expectation, right? Because that's where we really want to go. We want to see that, wind in our hair, and that movement through a fast, sort of a speedway into the grasslands. How do we achieve that, and how hard is that, right? And so the basic thing is that, to understand that perhaps, um, it takes practice, just like any other thing, and perseverance, right? And so the next one, I'm calling it gears and wheels. So basically, a lot of times your motorcycle will break down and you're going to feel a little like overwhelmed by the whole thing. But you have to not sort of let it go, and you have to take help of your friends like this. You have to, get wherever you can get your guidance from. Move ahead with this journey. This is like a road trip, like I said. And for me, having done philosophy, it has been more so, because it's not a subject that comes easy. It's a lot of it is quite abstract and obscure, and to be able to do that has not been easy. However, it has its own joys because of its, the exact struggle that I'm talking about. The fact that I was able to write the two books is because of a certain academic research that I was already undertaking. Keep doing that until you find a sort of a shape there, and then eventually you kind of push it into some sort of publication if you think there's merit there, and you're able to either produce an article or a chapter or a book, depending on how it's looking. So you take that call. So let's start with the very beginning, the academic process, the academic writing process itself. And what's the basics of writing? One of the purposes of academic writing obviously is that writing for academic purposes, as opposed to writing like a poem or writing a story. You're writing about an academic topic, some kind of research, some kind of thing that you have either been taught or you're learning or you want to research in. And so you're focusing on a certain area of research. And you often think also that that you can't begin to write unless you've decided what you want to say. But I feel like academic writing is much more than that. So what happens is it's like a complex skill, like I said, and it takes a little time for you to sort of develop. And it's not like anybody can boast that they are proficient. I mean, because everybody's learning at every time. And it's not a linear process. It's not like you've learned it and then you forget about it, because it's constant practice and constant sort of immersion into that. So it's a recursive practice, and it's like, you keep doing it, and then you learn to do it a bit better, and you get ideas, and some things open up automatically. And you create these drafts when you write. It's You may get an idea, you may have a field of research that you're already into, but it's important to be able to record that, you know your thought, and then the recording of it. And when you draft, you want to come back to it, you want to revise it, you want to re-see it, as it were, what you have written. So reading is one aspect of it. But are you reading? So there are two ways of going about that reading. I mean, you are already in a space where there's academic text available for you for your subjects. uh, so you immerse yourself into that kind of text. So you identify and you locate and you evaluate the text that you are going to need for your research. You look at, in a very focused way, you look at reading lists, you look at the library catalogs, you look at various web and online sort of resources. You have to evaluate your content, you have to evaluate your sources, and you have to see what really fits into your research area. What are your specializations? It's important to focus to avoid it's usually effective when you pick one area out, focus on it, get as much detail into it as you like, into the literature, into its research areas, what other people are saying, and then bring that together. Yet otherwise, when you start from a narrow part and you want to go general, the opposite direction, that is, it gets a little tough to manage, because you don't know what you're writing on anymore, because it's become too general suddenly, right? So the idea is to go from the broad to the narrow. It's easier that way. Reading and developing your critical approach. Now, academic writing is different from other kinds of writing. When you are writing stories, or when you're writing novels, when you're writing poems, when you're writing other kinds of writing which is non-academic, uh, you don't necessarily need to play by these rules. But when you are writing academically, it's important that whatever is your research, I mean, let's say something on air quality, let's say. Now, you could cite facts. That's one way of doing it, saying that, okay, I have spoken to, let's say my sample size is 6 people or 60 people or 600 people. Each of them have said this, and I have documented their interviews, and I'm saying this. Now, that's one way of reporting or stating the facts. But it's important in academic writing not merely to state facts, but to also have a critical approach. Now, it's not enough to have read and to summarize, because that would not show your critical approach to what you want to say. So developing critical approaches to texts, to ideas, to what other people are saying is really important in academic writing. Is by when you're reading itself, that which is the first step in a way. uh, you have to develop that critical approach right at the start while reading itself, and then when you write, then you are kind of, bringing back that critical approach, and you're continuing that same frame of thinking and stance to actually also be able to write critically. So reading critically, not just reading passively, and writing critically. And when we say critical, it doesn't necessarily mean it's negative. As we know, it could be positive, it could be negative, but it shows engagement, it shows evaluation. And we'll see that some of it, or some of this process that I'm now talking about in academic writing, comes extremely handy when we're publishing. So if we have done this part right, a lot of academic publishing will become fairly easy for us later. So when you're looking at your sources, for example, what you're reading, your literary text, your, whatever is your, you have Wordsworth, or you look at their titles and your subtitles, right? You look at the primary text, you look at what they have written, you look at what other people have written about them, you look at the courses and the research around that, and separate facts from opinions. So, for example, I worked on German philosopher Hegel. Supposing I say that Hegel believed in, when there is going to be a historical sort of transformation in civilizations, two ways of writing that. You could say that the world will move like this. Now, those are facts. Now, but can I call that fact? Because it's really an interpretation. So perhaps it'll be better to read and to write. If I'm writing about Hegel, perhaps I should say that for Hegel it meant this, or Hegel thought, or Hegel believed that the world was like this, rather than saying that the world itself is like this, right? So the difference between fact and opinion needs to be very clear in when you are doing this kind of critical reading. You have to see what is actually true of the world or of the text or of something, and what is the interpretation, right? um, Similarly, who is the author, and why did they write like this? Their motivations, right? What they're thinking, how they're thinking. uh, then you consider the reliability of the information that they're giving you. So, for example, you read on a website that's tomorrow there's going to be an eclipse. Now, when you read it, are you going to quickly write that down somewhere saying that tomorrow is going to be an eclipse without checking the source of it? Perhaps not. You're going to check the reliability of that source. You're going to see two or three other sources and see whether it's actually right, or whether somebody's just playing a prank and just writing it without any, right? So assessing your sources is extremely important. Then the other thing will be cultural preferences. You have to be extremely sensitive to cultural preferences, about identity preferences when you're writing in your language. When you are talking, it should be inclusive. It should show that you have thought about these things. It's important to be gender neutral. It's important to be culturally sensitive when you are making a point, when you are thinking about things. So it's important to have all opinions in that sense, right? So because this is a sort of a social media offers us this participatory society where people actually can see you, read you, talk about you, they can offer feedback. So it's increasingly important that your work, whatever it is, meets those criteria, and it's kind of sensitive, and it's not tone deaf. I'm going to show you two or three or four ideas of what, suppose the topic of your research is on immigration, let's say, right? You can list any ideas that come to mind. So one way of doing it is brainstorming, right? What is the other way of doing it? So you see, for example, it's on immigration, so you think of any ideas that came to your head. What is a cluster diagram? You have a main idea, which let's say is in these, the star, right? Immigration issues. And then you have these other ideas. You have sub ideas like economics, education, culture, demographics. You have all little tiny other paths which kind of branch out. So you have smaller ideas that kind of pull together into those larger ideas. So I hope you get a sense of what I'm trying to say. Basically, it's about how you're putting your ideas in place through these little ways of doing it. You can do a brainstorm, you can do a cluster diagram, you can do a concept map and flowchart as well. You can have these kinds of ideas where you sort of think about one idea flowing into another, and you create these visual maps for you so that it helps you write. If you're trying to put your research together, trying to put your ideas together, trying to put your data together, these are some of the ways of doing it. So that concept maps and flowcharts is another, and you have an idea outline, right? So this is simply an outline. You kind of create sort of a skeletal structure where you have a background, then you have some main headings, then you have some subheadings, right? So it's the hierarchy of how the ideas flow and what you want to say, and the data that you have already uh, built in, what you have found. So you have read a lot of books, let's say, and you found that these are the main key ideas that you have found from there. One of the main thing about academic writing is that you will have a thesis, you will have something to say, and then the rest of the writing is kind of a process through which you're going to um, talk about that idea, give arguments in favor, and to give that conclusion, a strong conclusion, saying that, look, this is what I proposed, this is what I have found, and these are my arguments, these are my counter arguments, this is what my peers have said or other books have said, and then this is how I conclude, right? So the key points, note making, drafting, these are some of the ways of putting your ideas together, and how ideas look like once they are put here. And obviously you're not going to put the whole book in your writing, but you're going to summarize parts of it, you're going to paraphrase parts of it, and you're going to add evidence and research findings, right? Now while you're doing that, when you are summarizing an idea or when you are paraphrasing an idea, what happens often? Scholars, writers will struggle with something called plagiarism. Basically, you're going to check, because the research process is so long and so deep. Sometimes you've forgotten where you have taken your ideas or your text from, which means that you may have forgotten the source, and worse, you may have forgotten to acknowledge the source. So um, it's extremely important in academic writing and in academic publishing that you acknowledge these sources. Now when do you cite? You cite when you're using a whole paragraph from somewhere, or you're using a line from somewhere, when you're using an idea from somewhere. And so it's going to be really important for you to acknowledge that person, acknowledge that book, acknowledge that page number where you found that idea first. Which means that whenever you're reading in the beginning, and when you're collecting your information, your data, you should remember to always have that information along with you, so that at the end you're not fumbling and you're not trying to find out sources, because it's going to be very hard later to actually go and look for them. So one of the ways to do this is to keep your quotes brief. uh, don't overquote, don't over rely on other people's sort of quotations. You write as you would like, and just passingly you can talk about these things. You can indent quotes if they're longish, then you can indent them, so that means you can put it a little inside, and then that helps the reader immediately see that, okay, this is your writing, and this blocked or indented quote is something that is someone else's, right? It's a good ethic to do that. And it's extremely important for academic writers to also not just write what they have read, but also to signpost, use words which act as signposts for readers. So when you are let's say, for example, you have written something, Now when someone is reading it, you have to think from that angle. That will, you may be conversant with your research, understand whoever is the reader, can they understand? So what you do is to leave these little hints and clues within the text itself. So it is called meta language. So what is language? You are already writing this, and then you have a language that talks about this language, right? Which would mean, suppose you're writing about Hamlet, let's say. Now when you're writing about Hamlet, and you have got some great ideas, and you're writing about it, and you're in a flow, you're writing it, but you've forgotten that you may have to tell the reader that, perhaps you can send them certain clues within the writing itself, so they know what's going on. You can say things like, as we saw before, this is what we said. uh, and you talk about the movement within your writing. You say, I'm going to, so in the beginning, for example, when you are writing the introduction, you kind of say how you're going to do this. So you say, all right, this is going to be my introduction. So this, now you're talking to the reader when you're writing. So you're saying, you're not talking about Hamlet anymore. You're saying, I'm going to be talking about Hamlet in this piece of writing, and I'm going to, do this first, do that first, and then conclude like this. And then you actually talk about Hamlet. You talk about Hamlet, you talk about everything that you wanted to say, and in between you leave these pointers for the readers. You say, all right, as we saw, Hamlet did this, his father was there, but I want to argue that this is what happened. So you give these little very explicit signals within your writing for the reader, so the reader understands, all right, we know this is about Hamlet, but we also know, okay, this is the thought behind the uh, writer who is writing about Hamlet. This is the meta language. Citations. So that's another thing we already talked about. References, about paraphrasing. Now it's very important when we are paraphrasing, when we are referencing, that we need to cite. Like we said, it is only ethical for us to cite people. And citations are of various kinds, but you can include that within the writing itself. Previous studies in human and non-human animals have identified. You haven't said which previous studies have identified. You put it in the bracket saying Fleming and Dolan 2012, which means people will then go to Fleming and Dolan 2012 when you references, and they'll find out what you're talking about. Other thing is to actually do come when you are when you have when you're beset with a lot of the sources, then you are also combining sources. So you are talking about some from one book, some from another book, some from another journal article, and you have to find a way to synthesize that without making it a hodgepodge, right? You see what really is important and relevant to your text, and keep only that, discard the rest. And what kind of texts are you looking at? Usually you will have books. For academic writing, you will have books, you will have thesis, you will have ebooks, you will have journal articles, you will have research databases, you could have conference proceedings, you could have technical reports. In some cases you could have online blogs, you could have public documents uploaded by official institutions, and things like that. You could have primary research coming from some archives, or even things like interviews and all. People have, do a lot of that in the social sciences. So all kinds of sources can be your sort of posture, and you can use that to locate, evaluate, and summarize and synthesize whatever it is that you wish to write on. We already talked a little bit about this, but it's extremely important to write, but not just end there. You have to rewrite and you have to revise. So when you're writing in the beginning, don't have any hesitation. Don't be fearful. Just keep writing. Free writing, right? But you will have to revisit that after a break. You will have to look at various drafts. So because when you're rewriting and when you're revising, you can look at the structure that you have produced, and you can kind of separate what is important, what is not so important, what is heavy, what is a little light, and you kind of separate these things, and you then create your work based on how it goes. And you the second time when you're reading it, second or third or fourth time when you're reading or redrafting, then you ask yourself, what changes do I need to make, which will help the reader. So think of the reader as at one side. How can I make this text easier to follow? Is it becoming too dense, too difficult? How do I lighten it, right? And to make these changes, you will have to rewrite either some sections, or you can do some minor text changes. You can resequence some paragraphs. You can change examples, and you can delete a lot that you don't need anymore, because in the beginning you have written down pretty much everything that you wanted to write, but all of that doesn't need to be in the final format, right? And finally, you will have the editing and proofreading, because that's without editing your work. And remember, you don't need to do it in the beginning, because when you are thinking about editing, proofreading in the beginning, it kind of messes with your head. You don't want to do that. You want to concentrate on thinking and writing first, no matter it has spelling errors and things like that. Don't worry about those things. It's only towards the end, when you are trying to finalize everything, when you're trying to um, trying to put everything together, you have redrafted, you have the final shape in place. That's when you kind of do this last scheme, go through everything, and then finalize and polish, because now you're going to go public. Because until now, it's your personal sort of a thing which you are doing yourself, and nobody in the world knows about it. But now it's time for it to actually see. So you could share it with your colleagues, you could share it with your friends, you could share it with your publishers before doing all of this, right? So proofreading and editing is an important component, and don't let any academic work go with those errors, because it will affect the chance of how well, or how it's, whether or not it succeeds, right? So formatting the references, formatting the notes all correctly, looking that the language is accurate, and all of this is really important, for you to hopefully go viral once your book is out. So, one of the elements of writing, who is the reader? Think about this. Who is the reader, and why do they need to know what you are writing? So, you need to bring that argument out. Why is this subject that writing about is important? What method of reading will they be using? Who are you talking to? Who is your audience, and what does the writer need to say, and how or when does it need to be written? You have to understand the timing of it. Where will that material come from in order to for you to write? How much time have you got to write it? Let's say you have got a deadline. You have been told that, okay, you need to submit this within 6 weeks or 8 weeks. Then you have to plan accordingly. You have to go backwards, and you will see that, okay, I have this much time for reading, researching, and writing, which have to keep some time for editing and proofreading as well. During my MPhil, I actually did work on Hegel and on Chomsky, Kant. And then on Hegel, it seemed like there was material enough to actually bring out a book. But I do remember that it was not easy doing that, because you have to first think, okay, fine, I have this idea, we can bring this book together, but where are the sources going to be? So you find the sources, then you put it all together, and then you have a deadline, because you're trying to think in terms of, because I was still working at the time, so which means that I need to now see how much time can I put to this, and how much time can I put to my other aspects of life. So and because and one of the other issues that some of the South Asian scholars may face is that English is not our native language. So while we are proficient in a number of multiple languages, English may or not be your very core strength. So often, some scholars will struggle with actually getting the English right. And again, you have to, the only way out is reading and writing, doing the same thing more and more. And that's the only way language, you really get better in a language, by doing that, by engaging with language, by engaging with people who know that language, by reading books which are in that language, and then trying to do that a bit by yourself. So, what's your content going to be if you think about the structure of how academic writing is, or a piece is? Basically, it'll be either a chapter or an article or an essay or a book. The book will be a combination of chapters, right? And how do you organize these paragraphs? You have a paragraph structure. You will usually have a introducing paragraph, and then you will link them together. But you will also have abstracts for each chapter, and you will have a sort of a layout, like we saw. I mean, you can have that brains. You remember that outline that we first created. So you first create an outline, but when you eventually turn it into a chapter or a book, you will need to have those two three components of an introduction, of a body, of a conclusion, and you will have references. So an introduction will be an overall position or argument or a thesis or sort of statement of thesis. Then the body will be sub arguments, supporting evidence and counter arguments, and then the conclusion, where you will reinforce what you have already tried to argue through the chapter. And then you will have references which will tell you where what all sources you've used to do that. That's the basic layout. You could also have something like, you state the aims of what you want to do. That's your first section, that you don't uh, directly dive into your Hamlet story. Now you want to talk about Hamlet, but in the beginning you will have to introduce that for the reader. You will have to say, okay, I want to talk about Hamlet, but this is why it's important. You will give that introduction. You will say, okay, I this is what I want to say about Hamlet. That'll be your overall position. You will say, this aspect is new about Hamlet, that is why it's important. So you have to situate your newness, your the significance of it in the very beginning. Then you give all your arguments, all your ideas. You said, okay, this text said this, but this is what I found in act 1, uh, you know act 7 said this. And you do all your evidence based kind of talking into the body. Then you conclude. Then you add references about whoever you may have referred to, right? So your aim, so you need to list out your aims very clearly in the beginning. And often a lot of people forget to do that. They jump straight into the research because it's so close to your heart by then you do some kind of after the listing of the aims, you kind of say, this is the debate, this is the sort of the current state of the understanding on Hamlet at this point. These are the books which talk about Hamlet this way, this way, this way, this way. So you do kind of an overall review. Then you look at the background issues, you look at some of the theories. Then you look at the method. You say, okay, I am going to look at this, and you lay out your method. You say, all right, I these are the texts I look at. This is how I will proceed. And then you give your account of your investigation. Have some findings. Give your findings. Then you evaluate the findings. You compare it with someone else. You give some counter arguments. You provide some critical interpretation. Then what you couldn't do, you can also mention that. You could say that, okay, these are the ideas for further direction. Especially in social sciences, often what happens is, you haven't been able to actually complete all of the thinking, or a policy, or some aspect of an issue. Suppose you're talking about immigration in India. Now, that research may not have covered everything. They may have covered a part of it. So you kind of then you can uh, talk about what you haven't been able to complete in this research, but you can do it in the next one. What are the future directions from this? And then you can add any other elements like appendices or any other things. So just showing you how you can put all that together. You have this. And I believe me, I mean, I've the two books that I have worked on, they started out looking like this. Basically, 1 page, 2 page, 3 page long, where you just have that whole skeleton, and then you fill it in as you fine tune these subheadings, and you create this for yourself, for any aspect of research. And it's going to give you, it in the beginning it looks like it's daunting, it doesn't seem like it'll happen, but it does happen. you know so that's the style structure. You have the introduction, you set out the main thing, then you have the main text, then you have conclusion, and you have the styles and presentations. How is academic writing different um, from other type of writing? Basically, you will have much more um, uh, critical thinking, analytic reasoning, argumentation. You will have to engage with the reader. You will have a comparison. You will have a definition of things. You will have examples. You will have generalization. There will be descriptions of things. Then there might be case studies. There could be some empirical work, theoretical work, interviews. There could be visual information. So all of that put together, and there will be certain cohesiveness, a conciseness, a clarity, and a structure into your writing. When you are contextualizing, summarizing, quoting, sourcing, agreeing or disagreeing with someone, evaluating, that's academic writing. Then you are defining, you're exemplifying, you're explaining, comparing, you're contrasting, classifying. So you've talked about Hamlet, but you classified under something, you categorized it under something while writing. And then you are talking about other views that you don't agree with necessarily, but you talk about them, and you kind of say why you do or do not agree with them. And then you recommend and you connect. So these a few elements make academic writing rather than some other form of writing. And there is a great deal of intertextuality, which means that you have this writing, but on when you are writing on Hamlet, you are not in a silo. You're talking about other people who have also talked about Hamlet, but your interpretation is different. And in your writing, that's kind of clearly comes through. And that's how writing talks about other writing. And what are the gaps? So, for example, here, what have they said? What have others said? Why is the topic important? What are the issues and controversies around some topic? And how others have approached, how you're going to approach, what are the links, how you can contribute. These are the ways of actually, separating any academic writing from other forms of writing. Any academic writing, you have a thesis, like we said. What are the elements of that argument? You take up a position, then you develop a stance to that position, and you explore other alternative points of view. Then you link theory and evidence, and you draw a conclusion. You develop a central idea and use evidence to support. You could have qualitative data, you could have quantitative data, and you then show, okay, this is how I. And you also express some of your personal opinions and interpretations, so that is called the authorial voice. So the authors needs to have a voice. They shouldn't simply be paraphrasing and summarizing what others have said, but you need to be engaged very actively to say, okay, this is how I think uh, it plays out. This is what I feel uh, Hamlet has done, right? A well structured argument, therefore, will have this very strong logical reasoning and evidence. So that's called the sort of meta discourse, as it were. So you have a, like I said, writing and then writing about other, talking about the writing itself. So, and how does the writer convey their opinion or views? I've called it the writer acts. When a writer, uh, is writing, they do various things within their writing. So not only will they say what Hamlet is thinking, but they can do it by using these words. They can say things like, I investigate, I analyze, I compare, I believe, I think, or that they conceptualize, they meaning other scholars, they view, they focus on, they consider, they discuss. That writer establishes that this happens, they demonstrate, they confirm. So these are words, these are some of the words. Or you say, if you want to go less strong, then you say they state this, or they report this, they mention this, they observe this, right? But when you're wanting to be stronger, you say they establish it, they demonstrate it. If you are not very sure about what you have done or what somebody else has done, then you use words like I believe, I suppose, they indicate. Instead of saying they, explain or they affirm, you say they suggest, they propose, right? So using words of various degrees of emphasis and unambiguous sort of strength, to show the reader, when the reader reads these words, they will understand it differently. So you play around with these various words to say what you mean, and you don't always use the same words. You use different words like these to clarify the level of belief that the writer has on what they are writing about someone or about themselves, right? You use these words. Similarly, you will either state a fact or you will state an opinion. So you have to always separate the two, a fact versus belief or an opinion. So when you have a weak form of that, you can say, this may result in, or it is possible that, or it would seem that, or it may have contributed to. But when you want to go strong and you want to make a stronger argument, you say this will result in, or it is highly likely, or it's highly probable that this will happen. Or you will say this shows, or this demonstrates. So again, you play with weak and strong phrases and words to be able to put your point across, right? Some of the engagement strategies I was hoping to mention this very for you also, is how you want to um, you know um, let the reader know what you're doing. So by engaging with the reader within your writing, they'll be able to first make a connect in in what you're writing. So for example, you'll say, uh, in such and such book, this is what was written. But if you concede that, suppose you use the phrase if you concede that, or if you say as we can see that, or you say then you must consider this. So who are you talking to? You're talking to the reader. So the reader is reading all of this as you're writing, and they sense that, all right, now the writer is actually making that connect with the reader, and then their thinking is sort of forming accordingly. So when you write, we would expect that, or the reader will note the use of this term or this term in Act 5, Act 6. So it instantly creates this engagement strategy within writing, and this is important to do. So it doesn't always have to be neutral and distant. It can converse with the reader, right? Now that's the sort of content and process side of things. But as we have mentioned, it's important to look at the form of what you're writing. So the content and the form, right? What's the form of it? You have a length. So you need to have a clear idea of how many words, how many pages something is going to be. Is there a deadline? Is there a structure to it, that the wherever you are submitting it, that already asks for that structure? So what is the content and format of the manuscript or your chapter or an essay or an article going to be? Are there going to be images there? Try various varying lengths, yeah, varying paragraph structures, just to keep the flow of the writing uh, robust, solid, and smooth. And you will have a very good set of references and notes. You will have to look at any copyright permissions, etc. You will have to look at all the proofing and other things. So try to not have clumsy sentences or incomplete sentences. Have a style that's kind of energetic, it's compelling for the reader, it's concise, it's not, it doesn't go here and there, it kind of focuses and keeps you on track. And it clearly sets out your aims and structure and conclusion with examples and evidence. That always works. Instead of using third person, try to use the first person. It's more engaging that way. It Instead of saying it may be said, you can say I argue, I think, I believe. That is more direct. Use active voices rather than passive voices. Sometimes that works. Keep to short content and revise draft while you're doing. It's all good to say all this. You have good writing, then you have good publishing, but you could have other constraints like practical constraints. And the Greek philosophers call it phronesis, the practical wisdom of how to act. So you have all this theory, right? We are talking, I'm giving you some ideas, my experiences of how we have come this far. Now this may be seen as theory. These are words, these are ideas, these are experiences, but how to act in a certain situation, and that to your own situation. So we could learn the principles of these actions and theories, but how to apply them in our own situation, to manage one's work, to manage one's time, to manage one's distractions, to manage one's life's other responsibilities. And that there is a certain practical prudence to it, that it's not easy for us to kind of achieve that very easily. But it again, it's just like everything else, it's practice. You have to prioritize, you have to see what comes when. And just like habit. And for example, procrastination and writer's block is something that people often struggle with. So if that's going to be an issue, then you have to say, okay, how did some of the greatest writers write? And you hear that Ernest Hemingway apparently used to stand up and write. So people have quirky habits, when they can write, how they can write, when does it give it joy to them to write. Gertrude Stein apparently wrote in a car. Now you may find your own way of how to write, when to write, when you can do research, when are you most productive, timing, morning, evening. All of these practical things will also make a difference in how well you are able to produce academic work. And I do remember this very clearly, during the making of the Hegel book. I mean, like I said, it began with some of like that skeleton of sorts of ideas and things, and then you can imagine the kind of text that I had to go through, German, translated into English, but often out of copyright. But were I had to find those texts. It wasn't easy. Then we had to, kind of get them rekeyed. I had to proofread them. I had to look through all of the clues I was looking at. and then to create the after all of that happened, that took like years, I think, like I must have worked on it at least 5 6 years. And then finally the references bibliography, and I'm trying to compile this at the end after everything is done. And I remember this was at night one day when I'm working, and I almost work like 6 7 hours at night, I think, that day, or maybe more. And then at some point, I'm just sitting there and I'm staring at this screen and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I'm doing references, I'm doing like bibliography and references after midnight when I'm so tired and I don't want to work. And why am I doing this? And so I tell myself that, all right, it's fine. I have already done so much. It's already over. It's about to be over. So I just have to do these 45 pages more, and I think it'll be done after that. So I just push myself. I do that, and then I have gone through that terror of doing it at a time when I'm not wanting to do it. I want to maybe watch a movie or something, or relax, but I have to finish it, so I'm doing it. And then once it's done, I forgot. I've slept off, crashed pretty much. And then after a day or two, I mean, because you're still hit by all that labor and all that, but within 2 3 days, I've forgotten all that. I mean, I've forgotten that the pain I was feeling and all of that, because it's now done. So I'm happier that it's all complete. It looks nice, and I'm now ready to submit it to the publisher. And once it does, then it starts getting good feedback. It starts getting good endorsements. And then once the book is out in the public, then people are responding nicely. They are reading it, they're writing about it, they're what I'm trying to say is that there are tough days, and we saw those expectation and reality visuals, where expectation seems like it will be a breezy road. It's not always a breezy road. But if you just persevere and you just prioritize, you cut out your time, and all the big things that seem overwhelming, just break it down to smaller tasks. Just say that, all right, I'm not going to think about the whole thing. I'm going to think about only a small thing and a small task for that day. Then it becomes manageable. So you have to figure out a way of managing that work, managing the time within a certain deadline, whatever is your deadline, and then work accordingly. So that's the phronesis aspect of academic writing. All of the good writing that you have done, how do you publish it? You write about something that you really care about, and you also should know where you are going to publish it. That's important. Who are you writing for, and who will you submit it to? It's important to have that right fit. Always have to be patient and persistent. There's no two ways about it. You have to be at it, and you have to practice it, and you have to have dialogue with this kind of with academic researchers and reviewers, and you use that feedback to improve your writing. So you have to be open minded about what you have found, what you have written. Maybe your ideas are perfect, but maybe the way you have written it is not so there could be a mismatch there. If you have got these elements right, all that we have discussed, it's going to be fairly easy when you're trying to publish it. So now we're moving from academic writing to academic publishing. When you're looking at publishers type, you will see that there are various kinds of publisher. They will some may publish trade books, some will publish academic books. And if it is academic, then you have to see whether they're publishing sciences and technology and medicine, or are they publishing humanities and social science. So you will have to narrow your sort of focus accordingly to see who you are targeting, who are the publishers who are publishing good books in your area. Every publisher will have a set of guidelines, and you'll have to see that your manuscript or your chapter or your article follows that. You will have to go through a certain process. You will have to write emails that you think have considered all your ideas properly. You have to make it a very basic kind of a structure, and you can keep using that for whoever you want to submit. You look at a proposal's format, and you look at the sort of there will be what is the process behind it in any if you're trying to submit a book, for example, then there will be a proposal you will have to write, you know and a proposal usually will have a title and a subtitle, say what all themes and objectives it has. It will have a detailed synopsis of all your chapters. It will give you all the headings and how many words the book is, the manuscript is, that is. Will it have tables, figures, diagrams? Will it have sample chapters? All these questions you will have to answer for the publisher. You'll have to fill that form. You'll have to also give a certain idea of what the target market is, which departments are going to buy this book of yours, who is it going to be interest for, what courses might use this book if we published it. Is it aimed at an undergraduate or a postgraduate student? Is it going to be a research monograph that is going to libraries, or does it have a general appeal? Things like that. And so once you do that proposal, then usually if the proposal is accepted and a contract is issued by a publisher, then the submission process looks something like this. I hope you can see a little bit of this. So basically, you will submit the manuscript, it will go through a certain editorial screening, then either it will be rejected if it doesn't fit or if it's not up to the mark. If it is accepted, it will be sent out for a peer review. A peer review is usually anonymous. It's called also a blind review, which means a expert in the field will look at your manuscript without knowing who you are, so that there is neutrality, and they will judge the book for how it is and whether or not the publisher should publish it. So publishers often rely on external expert peer reviewers to do this. Then you will have an editorial decision, and the editorial decisions would usually be either you accept the manuscript, either you reject the manuscript, or you revise and resubmit. And often, unless the book is really not up to the mark, you will either accept it or you will revise and resubmit. And then within revise and resubmit, you can have major revisions or you could have minor revisions based on what the reviewers have said, right? So these are the review decisions. And then the format. So it's important to keep in mind what the format of a manuscript is going to be. So you already have written your book manuscript. So, and then you have to see, have you followed all the guidelines? Do you have the title, subtitle, contents page? Do you have if you have figures and tables, do you have lists of figures and tables? Do you have abstracts and keywords for all? Do you have an acknowledgements page? Do you have the introduction, chapters, references, notes? If it's a translated work, then do you want to put a note on translation so that the reader knows what conventions have been followed? Does it use diacritical mark? After all the manuscript is in the right place, it will be copy edited by a copy editor. Then there will be proofs, which means that the Word document pages will be typeset and laid out into the actual book format. And then PDFs will be created, proof PDFs. Those will be sent to the authors. The authors usually would look at those proofs to read them, correct them, whatever minor correction, not major corrections at proof stage. And then the final version will go to the press. And first talked about the book, but if you were to only write an article or a chapter, then you will have to see that at least these elements are there, that you have the title, you have the author, you have the abstracts, you have the keywords, then you have the introduction, then whatever is your body, then you have acknowledgements, references, footnotes, and you're responding to the referees, and then you have proofs, right? So this is the last bit. Apart from the text matter, there would be the visuals. If you have visuals, you may have some figures or data tables. So just you have to ensure that they are in the right format, in the way that they have been asked for. Usually you have to keep to more text, less figures, tables, images where possible. You will have the text in form of an introduction and or a conclusion. You will have the preface, and you'll also have an author bio note. Then it's important to get this right, to have the content ready, have it in the right format according to the guidelines, and then to transfer that content to the publisher. How whether or not your subject fits that publisher, whether the topic fits that publisher, what they publish. So choosing where to publish is really crucial. If you're writing a research monograph, then it'll have a certain style. You need to have a strong research point of view with balanced views about giving both sides of the picture. And then references, bibliography, and notes, you have to be very, very careful with that, because that often affects the schedule and the unnecessary errors later. So you should see that the references, bibliography, and the endnotes are consistent, that they have been supplied correctly, that all page numbers, publication details are provided completely. If you have a name, don't miss the place. Don't So there is a whole structure of how references need to be done. You'll have a name, year, book title, page number, place, and publisher. So see that all of it is provided, the consents, copyrights, and permissions. One of these crucial ways in which we are ethical about our work is by quoting others, but to also acknowledge them. If we are using text, quotations, or visuals, or figures, or photographs, or maps from somewhere, whether a person or an institutions, we need to ensure that we have explicit permissions for it. If the website, if something is found on the website, often it happens, and this is something that comes all the time to me. We need to be able to understand what public domain involves. Now, something may be in available publicly, that doesn't mean it is in public domain for use in a book or use in a chapter. So if there is an image of Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse, or I don't know, anything for that matter, you have to see that you cannot use those icons as it is within your chapters without looking at what the permissions are. Music, lyrics, poetry, these have explicit copyright problems, so you can't just freely use these without consents. You cannot use other people's translations without consent. You can't use images, photographs, just because it was found on some website. You have to have clear consents of understanding what fair use contains. Sometimes you need to take explicit permission, especially if you have more than 400 words, if you're using music lyrics, if you're using images. Attribution is not enough. You have to get permissions for those sorts of things, or you drop it. You might have to cut it out if you think that you can't find the copyright holder and you don't want to use it. We have had these conversations with publisher to understand how we need it, when we need it, in what format we need it. And after the book is published, I mean, you had an idea, you began with like a little cluster map or a brainstorming session, and um, finally eventually wrote the book. You submitted it to a publisher, you got it published, but that's not the end of it. As Nukba and many others here, I'm sure, would know that simply publishing the book is not always enough. You will have to do a lot of work around it after the book is published, to be able to have opportunities to discuss it, to have it reviewed, to have certain promotional events around it, to talk about it, to have it on social media. So a lot of that is also the responsibility of an academic in this day and age. And so that's it, really.
Thank you so much, Ramina. This is pretty comprehensive, and I think students are overwhelmed because I can look at them and I can move around the camera just for you to see. So, because they are in thesis writing stage, but
Yes. Yeah.
I also, I think before we start a question, I just want to reiterate that thesis
Yeah.
writing is more or less like writing a little book, right? Smaller
Yes.
version of the book that we are
Yeah.
going that we publish, right, at senior stages. But then
Yeah.
you are learning all those skills, and more or less what Ramina has talked about, except from the last step where you're sending things to the publisher for
Yeah.
thesis writing, just as like writing a book. Okay, thank you so much, Ramina, and we hope to invite you at some other point soon.